In a world full of information and globalization, we have never been more connected.
While others would claim that we are actually the most disconnected in human history.
And information plays a large part in who and how we connect with others.
Censorship, a long and difficult history of struggle around the world against being silenced.
But how does it shape how we interact with others?
Our ability to educate others and learn ourselves.
I'm Cameron Young.
And I'm Derek Godwin. Let's talk about it.
So, what exactly is censorship, Derek?
It's a pretty broad topic, but it's often agreed that censorship is the institution or examination in order to suppress or delete anything considered objectionable.
Right, this could include a lot of different things like films and music, different books.
Right, and most often fear is a big part of why these things are censored in some way.
There are so many examples of this idea of public fear interfering with the spread of information, like with the Epperson versus Arkansas case.
Yes, the case about the anti-evolution statute.
In 1928, Arkansas enacted a statute prohibiting the teaching of the theory that man evolved from other species of life.
A teacher taught about the topic from a new textbook and immediately faced backlash from parents and the community. She then sued against the statute, saying it was unconstitutional.
Yeah, and she did actually establish that she and other teachers were allowed to teach it, but they could only teach it as a theory, not as a concrete fact. So it was still somewhat limiting for educators at the time.
Which is where our main concern comes into play.
The state of Florida is never going to descend into some woke dystopia. Our state is the state where woke goes to die.
So, that was the current governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis.
Yep, he's definitely getting them riled up.
In the past year, Florida has enacted several laws that aim at schools, most of them targeting what can be taught or even talked about in the classroom.
A lot of what is under fire is considered critical race theory and queer literature and topics.
There's a lot of pushback on what is being restricted and concerns being raised across the country.
The concern I have about these anti-critical race theory and anti-woke and anti-LGBTQ don't say gay type laws is that they're written so broadly that they're just there to stoke fear and uncertainty in educators.
So that was Dr. Douglas Lowen who talked to us about this broad censorship topic in the educational sphere.
He's a public policy professor here at UNC. He was a great guy to talk with.
Absolutely.
So then what is it exactly that we're talking about? So if it's very vague, it can just create, a blanket like, oh no, we're not going to talk about that.
So Lowen is one of many people who have already voiced their kind of anxiety about this incitement of fear around certain topics, which we actually asked him about in a follow-up.
Yeah, he gave some insight on how DeSantis has been so successful.
No, I think we, as a society, we've been, in some ways we're more diverse than we've ever been. And in other ways, we're more separate than we've ever been, right? Because the media landscape is such that everybody can find their media platform that appeals to them and speaks their language. And fear is a great motivator, right? When it comes to politics. And in some ways, it's, I think, the last 4 to 8 years has shown us that that fear may be a greater motivator than, love or kindness.
When looking at these trends, it's not a great feeling to look at the fear-mongering used in politics today.
DeSantis has proven to be a speaker who appeals to the masses because in just 2022 alone, he was able to spark a trend throughout the country to sponsor, quote-unquote, don't say gay and anti-woke bills.
He also started a trend of involving parents like never before. A lot of them are starting to raise concerns since DeSantis told them about how they should be.
The idea that a parent of like a fifth grader should just sit idly by if they have pornographic material in the library I'm sorry, that is not acceptable.
That's the thing, though. According to Dr. Lowen, the government can kind of do that.
That policymakers get to decide what's in the curriculum. They can choose to teach evolution or not. They can choose to teach math or not. Policymakers writ large get to make that decision because they pay for schooling.
Because things like Common Core and standardized testing not only exist on the local level, but the state level.
Exactly.
Although self-censorship and almost like a paranoia is most likely what's going on.
That's a separate matter from, for example, what a teacher can and can't say in a classroom, right? And so that's a self-censorship thing.
So Lowen told us that this could then lead to lawsuits and a whole bunch of chaos for these different schools involved, but at large, the school systems themselves.
And then you have to have brave people who say, no, I'm going to teach history the way I've been teaching it. And then a parent will complain, and then someone will sue, and then the school district will then have to decide whether to defend that case or not. And if it's a conservative school district, chances are they're going to either fire the teacher if they're not tenured or reprimand them and tell them to change their curriculum. If they're a liberal school district, then maybe they will stand up. But it depends on how much money they have, because it's costly.
So what exactly is to be done about all of it?
Well, he did give us some information about there usually is one person or a particular small group that stands up and puts their foot down, essentially.
Okay, so that's a part of how censorship is overcame, or how it's overturned in a sense. But there's still the change in public perception that would be needed first.
Right.
We had a small question that eventually became one of our main focuses. When does conformity become oppression? And how does the idea translate into censorship? There were so many different examples, specifically within the states. Cameron and I wondered how this idea was interpreted by the general public.
So we decided to walk around the campus here at UNC Chapel Hill to get a lot of different views from students and faculty.
Conformity becomes oppression when the general public doesn't align with your own views, and sometimes you're forced to follow the way they're going, and that may not be true to yourself. And if you act true to yourself, then everyone's going to reject you or at least treat you differently. So I feel like that's when it becomes oppression.
I guess when you don't realize that you're conforming, that's when oppression really starts.
Conformity becomes oppression at the point at which society enforces conformity over the will of the individual and to the detriment of society's own health.
We personally had a hard time answering this question, leading us to do a whole bunch of research on instances where conformity did actually become oppression.
Governor Greg Abbott, Republican, ordered education officials to, quote, develop statewide standards, prevent the presence of pornography and other obscene content in Texas public schools, including in school libraries.
We asked a lot of different people, and there were so many good answers. But answers made us think a little more about the meaning of freedom.
So we decided to add our idea of censorship and oppression by starting with the basics. What is freedom?
A sense of belonging is probably maximized when you feel most free, when you don't feel confined by your environment.
It lets people express who they are and connect with people who are similar to them or different from them. And so I think it lets people feel a sense of belonging because they can be who they are. It's a natural sense.
One of my favorite characters in U.S. history is a guy named Mario Savio, who was about the free speech movement at UC Berkeley. And he told people, with freedom comes responsibility. So with freedom comes the responsibility to be part of something bigger. You know, we all have the freedom to do whatever it is we want to do, but that's not what real freedom is. Freedom is to do what, society needs us to do.
If you have the freedom to express yourself, and as a whole, we all have freedom to express ourselves, then we find other people who like have like similar interests or similar ideas, and then like those similarities give us a sense of belonging.
A consistent idea that came up within these interviews was the idea that we should fight back this idea of censorship and conformity.
There weren't any specific solutions given, but we were excited to see what people thought about censorship and where people cross the line with their education.
There are many examples of conformity becoming oppression, not just the ones we mentioned today. Texas is banning a lot of books dealing with LGBTQ, sex, and related topics.
Even in Idaho, Northern Idaho Community College, or NIC, is another situation being discussed, where students and teachers find themselves having to answer to the board for more than enough.
The idea of power also plays a huge role in censorship and conformity. You could think of the board for Northern Idaho as those power-hungry policymakers in government.
And if you look closely, that's what brings all these ideas together. Everyone wants control over something, ranging from how different parts of education are presented, and most importantly, what is presented.